This is 9/11 Freefall.
Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm your host, Andrew Steele, and this is going to be a really good one tonight. I have as my guest Dr. Niels Harrit of the University of Copenhagen. He's a professor of chemistry there. He's also one of the key authors of the paper that lays out the evidence of thermitic material found in the World Trade Center dust. Of course, we refer a lot to that paper on this program, as you know. Well, tonight he's going to be talking about that paper. He's also going to be discussing a lawsuit that he's involved in, striking back at the media. In particular, a journalist who had some not so very nice things to say about Niels, calling him names and lumping him in with Holocaust deniers. Well, Niels is not taking it lying down, and he's going to try to get some of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence in the court there. So he's going to be talking about that in greater detail, and this is going to be one that you want to save and listen to over and over again and pass around. Niels is a very thoughtful, very inspirational guy to listen to. Just a tremendous spirit emanating from this man. I also think he's got one of the most sensitive microphones in the world. You're going to notice that at some parts of the interview that it picks up some noise when he moves around. But I think we can deal, because it's worth it. It's worth hearing what Niels has to say, not just from an evidence perspective, but from a philosophical perspective too. So I'm going to be playing that for you in just a minute. Before I do play the interview for you, though, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. Niels Harrit is a chemist and a university teacher with expertise in organic chemistry, photochemistry, fluorescence, and nanotechnology. He's been an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen, that's in the Department of Chemistry, since 1975. He's had more than 60 papers in international peer-reviewed journals, including the one that we talk about all the time on this show, which demonstrates the signature of nano-thermite found in the World Trade Center dust. We're going to be getting all into that and into his lawsuit today here on the show. Niels, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Well, thank you for having me on, Andy.
Well, it's long overdue. You're a guest I've been seeking to get on the program for a long time. It was just a question of making the international connection here, but we managed to do it. So before we get into all of what I just mentioned, can you briefly go over your background a little bit more? Anything I left out in your description?
No, not really. I started studying science in 1963, actually. And I got my job at the university at a very young age. Those were the days, when everything was expanding. So I've actually been working at the university since 1971. But the level of associate professor was granted me on, as you mentioned, in 75. Actually, I was hired before I got my PhD, which is about photochemistry. This is the science of chemistry with light. And I did my master's. I was working in Germany at Max Planck Institute, which is a fairly famous kind of institute. There are several Max Planck institutes in Germany. I was very young, so I actually got into my career at a very early age. well, science, we got a very broad background those days. So even though I'm a chemist, I learned and I know a bit of physics and mathematics,
Well, that's the beauty of science, is that a lot of it overlaps, and one area of focus touches another area of focus and makes up this great universe that we all share together. What made you first start questioning 9/11 and going down this path of researching this topic?
My story is a classical story, really. It's the same story, happened so many times that at 9/11, my first thought was that now everybody should realize that the Star Wars project is a fraud, because this is not what we need. And I more or less bought into the official story about Osama bin Laden and the hijackers. And up until 2006, when I accidentally saw a video with Professor Stephen Earl Jones from Brigham Young University. And this just made my jaw drop for two reasons. First, I learned that this was World Trade Center, and which meant that whoever decides what I'm supposed to know had decided that I should know about this. And this was an offense, in a sense. And second, I couldn't understand why this building should just stay there and collapse. My whole life I've been watching nature from an analytical point of view. This is my training. And all scientists are like this. When we are seeing something, we automatically ask the question, how is this actually happening? And most of the time, if you have a broad education, if you have some sense of science and nature, without being too, immodest, I would say most of the time I'm doing quite well at my age. I do understand what's going on around me in the physical world. But on this occasion, I just simply couldn't get it, why this building was collapsing. So, and what happens then, as it happens to most people, you turn your back to it. You realize that here is something which hurts. Here is something which will bring you pain if you look into it. So you turn your back to it. And then some people, you and I, after a couple of weeks, we realized that there is no escape. There is no way away from this. So I had to go back and take a closer look. And I did. This was the end of 2006. And as we all know, the more you look into it, the worse it gets. And up until that time, I had never submitted an essay for a newspaper. But I did that in the spring of 2007 then. And this is a long story, but it actually ended up in print by accident. It's always, when we get into the mainstream media, it's almost always an accident, a slip by some journalist or some editor. But I got in print. This is March 2007. And I was naive at that time. I thought if you just stand up, and this essay was only about Building 7, about gravity and free fall and fire and steel frames. And so it was absolutely no pointing fingers at anything. It was just, hey, there's something wrong here. And then you expect, I expected naively, that if you just stand up on a soapbox and tell the truth, it will run on its own. But then afterwards, absolutely nothing happened. This was a mainstream, not a very big newspaper, but it has a great impact. And then I decided over the summer 2007, when I have to put a presentation together, and this is something I'm pretty good at because I've been teaching for 40 years at the university. I know how to address people, And also I have a side gig as a musician. I know how to talk to an audience. So in the summer of 2007, I launched my first presentation, which has been going on actually ever since. I passed the 220 mark this month, and more than 200 presentations I've given worldwide, 15 different countries. So this is the core of my, you say, ground level activity, my activist activity. This is giving presentations locally, predominantly. You know, Denmark is very small. We're only about 6-7 million people. It's half the size of London. So it's manageable for a little group like us, the truth community in Denmark. So I concentrate on that. So the 220 presentations, which mostly it runs over more than 2 hours with an intermission. And most of it, of course, is on 7. And then we get back to the towers in the end. And I end up, after more than 2 hours, with a coherent blast scenario, incorporating the nano-thermite, actually. I have a suggestion where the nano-thermite fits in. But if you are addressing the uninitiated, and this is what we do, and this is the challenge, each time to bring in a new crowd. And we are doing this. And the start of my presentation, when I show 7 for the first time, I ask the audience how many are seeing this for the first time. Have you seen this before? And about 3/4 of the audience says no. And this is a challenge. And this is where the real hard work is being done. That is to bring in freshmen from the street who has not seen 7 before. And this is what I spend all my time on doing, most of my time. So these 220 presentations, about 3/4 has been done in Denmark. And about 1/4, between 40 and 50, has been on international venues. I've been to 15 countries. And I know that Richard Gage is leading by far, probably. Richard must have passed the 350 mark. But I believe that I have a comfortable number 2.
That's right. You're one of the leaders in the 9/11 science truth movement, just for your credentials and what you've done, bringing this peer-reviewed paper to the forefront, creating it and letting it be used by the movement to reach out to other people. It's amazing. Now, just for members of this audience who may be new to this show, may have never even heard these arguments presented by our side of the debate before, can you please talk about your paper and the evidence that you found in the dust?
Yeah, sure. And the major credit should be given to Professor Stephen E. Jones. He was the one who first looked into the dust. And his bases were 2 reports, or 3, if you like, which came out in 2003, 2004, 2005 from a private company called the R.J. Lee Group and United States Geological Survey. And these reports, the R.J. Lee Group report was actually, part of an insurance conflict that Deutsche Bank had with Port Authority, or whoever owned Silverstein Properties, probably owned World Trade Center at the time. But it is pretty good work, actually. These reports were describing what was in the dust to a very large extent. Most importantly, in the R.J. Lee Group, they're reporting the occurrence of these iron spheres in a concentration of 5.87%. This actually is a huge number, which could be discussed. But they are there in abundance. And also the United States Geological Survey are reporting on the ionospheres, but their way of quantifying them is not directly translatable. You cannot directly translate it into percentage. But Stephen Jones read these reports this must have been 2006, 5 eventually. I think he discovered this in 2005. And on this basis, he wrote papers, 2 papers, I believe 3 eventually, because there are many conclusions to be drawn on the basis of these reports from the RJ Elite Group and the United States Geological Survey. And at some point, it was obvious from the RJ Elite Group and a lot of other evidence. There are a whole range of observations, each implicating the thermite was used also in the demolition of the 3 high-rises on Manhattan. There's no doubt that explosives were used, but there's also indications that thermitic material, let us be careful, and were used. There is the molten iron in the rubble and the ionospheres and the burning ashes, the hot clouds, everything. Many observations. And the sulfidation of the steel, which is another story. But and it is when you have an explosive event, or what do you say, an energetic event, it's never complete. If a bomb goes on somewhere, there's always some explosives left, and the police come in with the dogs and the technicians, and they can identify the kind of explosive being used. So Jones, Professor Jones, wondered if there would be other remains of thermitic material in the dust. And he came across in the microscope. It takes some skill. It's not so easy, actually, because these red-grade chips, as we call them, are very small. We are sub-millimeter. So it takes some skill and it takes some training, actually, to find them. But he discovered what we call the red-grade chips. This must be over the fall of 2007. And presented these at a presentation he gave, I believe, in Boston in December 2007. And then there is a side story with Kevin Ryan, who you're probably familiar with, a great man and a great chemist and scientist. Also during 2007, he published a paper in The Environmentalist about the emissions coming out from Ground Zero, which is a story on its own, which is unbelievable. And by accident, I was asked to review that paper. You know, the review process, the peer review process, is what you would call it. It's a duty that all scientists usually take on if they have the time. You know, you're asked to review a paper. The editor writes to you, can you review this paper? And if you have the time, you always say yes. But I was interested already at that time, in 9/11. So I said yes, and I became a reviewer of Kevin Ryan's paper. Now, usually, as you know, reviewers are anonymous. They're blind to the authors. The reviewer knows who the authors are, but the authors do not know the reviewer. But the reviewer has the freedom to contact the authors if it makes things easier and if it makes a better paper. And this is actually what I did with Kevin Ryan's paper. I shortcutted, you must say, the process, which is absolutely normal and legal because everybody saves time and you get a better paper out of it. So I wrote to Kevin Ryan and say, hey, this and that. I suggest this and that. And so I believe that I helped along improving at some points Kevin Ryan's paper, which Stephen Jones is a co-author on also as well. But I was communicating with Kevin Ryan at that time. And so when he's submitting the final revised manuscript, it's it's a piece of cake for the reviewer to okay it, because he has got I have all my request has been fulfilled at that point. So we just said fine, and it went through, and it's a great paper. It should have much more attention actually, because the emissions, the air emissions from Ground Zero is a story on its own. Nevertheless, after that, I was asked by these authors of the paper, environmentalists, to join the team investigating the red grade chips, and I was honored, honestly, to be invited, and I accepted it and contributed it. But Stephen E. Jones must be given the credit for starting this investigation.
Now, you already described what you kind of expected from the general public when you started talking about this, talking about Building 7, but from the scientific community, especially after the paper was published, I mean, did you have discussions with other chemists, people who didn't even know about this issue, your colleagues at the university? What did people say in your just general life, your professional life, about what you were bringing to the table?
I thought that this could be treated normally, if you would say. At the universities, we are having seminars and discussions and giving presentations and talks and having conferences and symposia and all this kind of stuff all the time. Every day at my institute, there are 2-3 presentations, and students are defending their work and stuff like that. So one of the first things I did, of course, was to announce. You put out a poster in the elevator on the board saying, hey, I'm giving a talk this afternoon at 2 o'clock in this room. I did that 2 or 3 times, and it was actually well received. The third time, my institute leader told me, forbid me to give the talk. I said, you're not allowed, I forbid you to hold this, to give this talk. So I had to stand outside the auditorium and actually turn people away and saying, I'm sorry, but his name has forbidden me to give this presentation. This was my boss. He told me, you're not allowed to talk at the institute. Well, we shortcut. Of course, he couldn't do that, but he did nevertheless, because he said, I rule over the rooms. Yeah, only until 5 o'clock. I said, okay. So we did it after 5 o'clock eventually, and we were very well visited. But and later he actually forbid me to give presentation in the public domain, which he couldn't. Then we looked up the rules, and of course he couldn't do that. So it was a bit tense. But the general point, if you should say, why isn't this discussed more? There are 2 or 3 reasons for this, maybe 3. Why isn't this discussed more in academia? First of all, scientists are not different from other people in the way they get their information. They are drawing on the same sources as everybody else. And since the mainstream media do not want to talk about this, they don't know, most of them. And so they should not, they're not special in this case. Neither are they special in their fear for their job. And academia has been gagged. Totally over the last 13 years, academia in the Western society has been gagged. And there are 2 reasons for that. They're instrumental. The University of Copenhagen was founded in 1488. 1488. This is as old as we are. And all over these hundreds of years, it has been a self-ruling body. It has been ruled by an assembly of peers from a university in the last 50 years, also including the students and the technical staff. This was changed in 2003, and by law, now everything is top-down by government, who who call in the president and the board, who hire the president, etc., etc. It's completely top-down now, hierarchical structure. And and these people, my boss, he could have fired me if he wanted to. And I've been a great teacher for 40 years, man. And the third thing is that the funding system was changed. I know this is very American, and you may not be able to understand that earlier on, the university scientists had a steady supply of money. I mean, they didn't have to ask for it. They didn't have to write applications. But this changed also 10 years ago. So now, basically, everybody is, particularly the young people, are writing applications for their own salary. That means that the university people are not different from the rest of society, and our Western society now is characterized by fear and by lies. So everybody's lying, because if you don't lie, you don't get any money. So we are breeding now a new generation of scientists trained to lie. And this is simple Darwin. If you don't, those who cannot write applications filled with lies, they don't get any money. So they're being squeezed out. And for this reason, academia is silent. Not only regarding 9/11, but all the other terrible things going on all over the world. And they're not too clever, because this is Darwin again, because if you're too clever, you don't get the job. Neither is a journalist. We all know this.
Now, this is a common question I ask folks on this show, but you touched on it yourself, so I'm going to ask you, what impact do you think the cover-up of 9/11 has on science itself? If we don't address the very real facts, what does this do to your branch of science and science in general?
Well, I would rather broaden your question out, because this is much more severe than just regarding science. Point is that when the lies are being accepted in society, and this is what has happened, it's been completely, the lie has been completely accepted, and 9/11 has become the mother of all lies for the last 30 years. This has a devastating impact on our civilization. And maybe you may think that I'm using big words now. Yes, I am, but that's what it is. Because if there is something that we are not supposed to talk about, in case 9/11, we'll end up, it has an impact on the interpersonal relationships. If you are having a dinner party, you know there are 3 topics which can blow the party into pieces, and this is politics, religion, and 9/11. If you bring up 9/11 at a dinner party, the party is over. And I mean, frankly, what is this? There's something we're not supposed to talk about. This is poison. And you can see it reflected if you have an eye for culture. It means that the language is deteriorating. So everywhere where language is being used, we are sliding slowly into the gray civilization of the DDR, Deutsche Demokratische Republik, all the countries where they have a secret police. And you know that you're not supposed to talk about this and that. It means that you do not talk on the train or on the bus, because secret police might be listening, and if you're saying the wrong word, you're being squeezed out of the tribe. Now, the tribe is the most important social unit. It overrules the family. So if you are expelled from the tribe, you're lost. In the Middle Ages, it was a death sentence to be expelled from the tribe, to be kicked out of the village. And it still works. So if you're sitting at the lunch table of the university and you bring up 9/11, It is unwanted territory. So you're being, I'm not talking personal here, but you are not welcome at the lunch table because this is not comme il faut, as the French says. Why is this? Why are we not allowed to talk about 9/11? Because it hurts. Because everybody knows, at least in Denmark, and courtesy our work here, everybody knows that everybody knows that everybody knows that everybody knows. But we just don't talk about it. There's a huge elephant in the room. And why don't we talk about it? Because it's painful. Because we have been betrayed to an extent which is incomprehensible to most people. They go away, as I did, as everybody does. I don't want to hear about it. You may be right, Niels, but I don't want to hear about it. This is what comes up all the time. So the message we are bringing up is not a happy message. We are actually making people fearful. We scare them, and it hurts, but we have to. It's like surgery. You have to do it. Particularly when I'm addressing high schools, kids. This is particularly difficult for me because, and it's a different story I'm telling the high school kids. We start with Tycho Brahe, the astronomer, and Galileo, and Johannes Kepler, and Newton, and it's more like a science thriller story. And then we use Newton's laws to solve this crime of killing 3,000 people. But still, the point is that I have to tell the kids that you have been betrayed by the very people who should have taken care of you. And this, nobody wants to hear that. So it's hard work. We're all in the truth movement. We know this. I mean, we are not popular. Nobody is going to say thank you to us. But our civilization is in the balance now. It's very, very serious. And 9/11 is key.
You're absolutely right. And I like that you distinguish, when you're talking about the three things you don't talk about at parties, or you distinguish politics from 9/11, because a lot of times, in my own experience, people say they don't want to talk about politics, as if 9/11 is political. It's a murder investigation. There should be nothing political about it, even if people have attached a political agenda to it. But what you describe is the secondary tragedy of 9/11, and I've talked about it before on the show. It's the fights that come up. It's the barriers put up between people who would have otherwise gotten along just fine had this event not taken place, had we not been lied to about what really destroyed the buildings. So I appreciate that you make that distinction, and you're a man of my own heart. I couldn't have stated it better myself. Now let's talk about the media and its reaction a little further. We know how the media works here in America, and apparently they're in Europe too, but you had the media going after you and calling you names, and you decided to fight back or with a lawsuit. So can you tell our audience that story?
Yeah, it was 2 years ago, or maybe let me say here precisely 2012, 1.5 years ago. And of course, we're not on very good terms with most of the press. You know, I'm addressing them every time I give a presentation. They get an invitation, and some of them are mad at me. But the young people, they know, and they use, actually now, there's a little handful who are using every opportunity just to let a little truth out. But in this case, it's one of the, you must say, right-wing oriented newspapers, but very respected newspapers. In December of 2012, so it must be around 2 years ago, the subject of this, it was what you call an editorial, was actually our local Royal Library here, and it's called Madness in the Library, which is called the Black Diamond because the building looks like Black Diamond, so it's called Madness in the Black Diamond. And it what triggered this editorial was that the director of the library first had accepted an exhibition of about the Armenian genocide of the Turks. You know, they killed the Armenians in what was it, 1920s. Genocide. So there had been an exhibition from the Armenian point of view on this event, and then the Turkish embassy here in Denmark came back and say, we demand that we have the right to make another exhibition from our point of view. And the director accepted that. Now, as most people, historians agree, it was a genuine genocide. The Turks actually killed many million Armenians. So this journalist is calling it madness that he's bringing in the Turkish point of view of the genocide, and he's kind of, what you say, legitimizing the guilty in this case for the genocide. And by doing that, he's saying he's opening the gates for all kind of lunatics and crooks who can come into the library and present all kind of stuff. And why not also bring in the creationists and the Holocaust deniers? And why not just bring in Niels Harrit and all the under crackpots from the 9/11 skeptics groups? Now we are at it. I mean, so his point is, and he's lining up all completely crazy things and putting me in league with Holocaust deniers and creationists, which is, you know, anti-Darwin, which is it's an insult to a scientist, and calling me a crackpot and other things. So enough was enough for me at that time. So I sued them. At the lowest level, of course, I don't know what you call this in English, but the lowest level here is called the city court. And I actually had Jan Utzon as an expert witness with me in court, because if you in a libel case, you're not allowed, according to Danish law, to bring out dishonorable statements about other people without being able to substantiate it, as to prove it. So they had the burden of proof. They should prove that I'm a crackpot. And maybe I should reverse to what you just said, because in my presentations, when I've given these 200 presentations, you're not allowed to talk politics. I start, my opening remarks is, political statements are not allowed. We are talking about science, observations, data, and numbers. So I have never, ever in the public domain pointed fingers. What I have done, it's a clean game here. I have only presented evidence on a scientific basis. So they had to prove that I'm a crackpot and as dishonest as Holocaust deniers. And they had a hard time doing that. But nevertheless, I lost, because according to the freedom of speech, I'm protected by the European Human Rights Court, European Human Rights Commission. They are actually rating the freedom of speech higher than the libel laws of Denmark. So by reference to that, I lost the case because the other part was allowed to say what they wanted. Of course, I didn't expect to win, because if I had won, it would open the gates to the 9/11 truth. But listen, still, according to the premises, even if you're referring to the freedom of speech, you still have to prove that, they still have to present evidence that whatever they said is correct. They must have a basis I don't know the proper English word for it. A factual basis would be correct. They must have a factual basis for their claims, and they don't. And if they had ruled according to law, I would have won. But, the law system and the courts are not always ruling according to law, okay? So I what do you call it? I applied for, what do you call it when you apply again?
Appeal?
Appeal, yeah. Of course, I appealed the case. So now it's coming up for what we call the country court. In England, you would call it the High Court. I don't know what you would call it in America, but it's a second level before the Supreme Court. We have 3 levels here. Supreme Court is the topper, so this is the medium level. There are 3 judges, and this is coming up in March. And I have some trumps. Well, one thing in the lower court was that this journalist, for one thing, he claimed that I had falsified the dust samples of the thermite paper, nano-thermite paper. And I had a dust sample in the court, and had brought a magnet. And I asked the judge, in 3 minutes, I can prove that this sample is authentic. It's a very simple experiment you do with a magnet, but you can see the iron spheres with the naked eye. And I offered to do the experiment, but the judge told me, no, you're not allowed to prove this evidence. But in the High Court, I have announced that I'm going to do that. And I believe that this will be the first time in a courtroom where a dust sample will be presented, and I will give evidence for thermite, because you can see the iron spheres. Of course, you have to read the paper, but this journalist claimed that he had read the paper. He didn't, but he can't read anything. He also claimed that he had attended one of my presentations, but he couldn't remember where. Come on. And so this is one. I have several, cards to play, very serious. One is that I'm going to present the dust. The other thing is I'm bringing a witness, a professor from the Niels Bohr Institute, a colleague of mine from the university, who actually was misquoted in the press for saying that Niels Harrit's theories is pure garbage. He was quoted for saying that in a newspaper, and they used this in the court. Now, this professor is going to witness on my behalf in the High Court. Because he told me the other day, I have read the data, Niels, and you are absolutely right. The official version is violation of Newton's laws. And I said, will you please write that down? No, he said. Why not? Because I want to say it myself. Okay, so we actually have to reschedule the whole thing because he couldn't appear in court on the first day it was scheduled in September. So we had to move the whole thing because he wanted to, professor from the Niels Bohr Institute, stay up in court and say that the official story is violation of Newton's laws. Third, I'm going to bring in Jan Utzon again. You know the architect Jan Utzon. He has also appeared in a great video with Richard Gage. And he's the son of Jørgen Utzon, who from the Sydney Opera. And Jan, who is a friend, and he's very 100% on our side. He will show up in court as well. Now, from these 2 witnesses gives me the opportunity to show Building 7 in the courtroom. And I have announced that, and I have not been turned off yet. This means I'm going to set up a projector. I'm going to show Building 7 going down to the court. 3 judges. And we all know, once you have seen Building 7, there is no way back. And I believe that this is a unique opportunity. You may please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this will be the first time globally that Building 7 will be shown in a courtroom in front of 3 judges in this case. They are going to have a very hard time.
Now, I have a question regarding the professor that they misquoted as saying that that your work was garbage. I mean, that seems like a pretty big misquote. If he says that you're right and they're saying that it's garbage, it doesn't sound like they just left a word out there. It sounds like a complete 180 from what they wrote in the paper. How did they misquote? What did he actually say that they got so wrong?
Well, it's hard to translate because what he said is Niels Harrit's theories is nonsense. And the point is that he is giving me projecting on me the claim that it was the American government who did it. And I've been discussing this with him. I said, no, I will not say his name. I said, no, you know very well I've never said that. But this is implied in your theory. I said, these were your words, not mine. First time I showed him Building 7. And this tells something about what we are up against here. He's a professor of physics at the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen. And we were sitting in front of a screen. We were watching Building 7 going down. And I said, let's call him. Jack, look at this. Look at this. No, he said. Look at this building, Jack. Look how it's going down. No, he said. It's going down with an acceleration of 9.8 meters per second squared. This is free fall. No. Yes, it is. Data doesn't mean anything. Did you get that? He said data doesn't mean a thing. Data are irrelevant. Professor of physics. He denounced Newton. And over an hour, 10 times he said data are irrelevant. Because what he could see, obviously, was against what he believed in about our governments. He just couldn't take in the thing. And he is the person. And then, well, it was me who recommended to a journalist that they should talk to him, because I wanted to have something to play with. I was interviewed for a newspaper and said, what does your colleagues say? He said, they don't say a thing. Well, there must some of them who say anything. Okay, then just talk to Jack. He's always ready for a fresh remark. And they picked this sentence out of what he said. Okay? So, and he is the person who is now coming back, witnessing on my behalf. This is huge for him personally to turn around to say to me, Niels, I have looked at the data and you are right. The official version is against Newton, and I want to say this in court. So we'll make a lot of noise here. I'm doing the case. I'm doing what you call it, proceedings myself. I don't know the English word for it. What do you say when what is the lawyer doing in the court?
Well, see, that's what I was going to ask you, because you're representing yourself in this case. I want to ask why you're doing that.
Well, for two reasons. First of all, I don't have the money to hire a lawyer, and the second, there's no lawyer who knows what I know. And to question, say, a professor of physics, or to question Jan Utzon, as to keep this on a factual level, it takes some knowledge. And there was actually a lawyer in the start who said, well, I wanted to do the case for you, but then he didn't know what he was saying. And when he realized what he said, he backed out. And I was happy for that, actually, because he made mistakes and mistakes and mistakes. There is only one person who can represent me in the courtroom, and that is me. But I do have a problem with all the paperwork, because I've never seen that kind of stuff before. I'm not afraid of talking in front of the judges, but I'm afraid of having the papers right. So I would sure like some volunteers coaching, let me say that, from a good lawyer. But there aren't too many of these around, and nobody knows. So what I'm looking for someone who can submit my paperwork and say, is this okay? And please show me a paradigm, whatever you call it. And please tell me how, because there's a lot of paperwork who precedes the day in court. And the judges, they don't like people who are representing themselves, honestly. So I'm up against this. But there's no way around that. And it was a great boost, actually, the first trial for our local movement, because, as I said, there is a handful of young journalists who are using every opportunity to open the lid a little bit, if you understand what I mean. So if they can report on this event, they will do it. And if the court is ruling according to law, I'm going to win. And there are many lawyers who are watching, but they just don't want to touch it themselves, because they don't want to be expelled from the tribe. But there are decent lawyers, but either they want money or they don't want to get their fingers in the pot.
Well, if there's anybody that's an expert on the law in Denmark who could help out and you're a listener, then you can contact Niels. How does anybody contact you? What's the way that you would want them to do that?
It's very easy. My name is Niels Harrit, and my email address is Niels, Niels, and @harrit.dk. There also is a Facebook page, but I'm not a Facebook. It's somebody else who's running my Facebook page, and they're doing a good work. But so you can find me.
It's important to mention too that they're trying to portray you like you're just some lone guy out there saying this. They don't mention that there were 9 other scientists who wrote the nano-thermite report, and this gentleman, I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, but it's Soren Wilmos. He didn't know about these other 8 scientists when he was in court, and he didn't even read the report. So I think that needs to get out there. He also said that he was scientifically unqualified to report on, and obviously he still felt he was qualified to shoot his mouth off.
Yeah. It's nice, isn't it?
Well, what gets me is that, I mean, at least in this country, in the United States, the press is so sensitive to offending certain groups that somebody makes a statement. I mean, if you offend the president, for instance, one actor made a comment about Obama being a socialist. Regardless of how you feel about socialism or Obama, the fact that the media got into this hysterical outrage over it and made him have to apologize, and he lost his whatever gig he was doing at the time over this is absolutely ridiculous. All right, so they jump on all of these people who express an opinion that may offend a certain group, but for somebody like yourself who is doing experiments, talking about science that can be proven, that can be experimented upon, and which is open and transparent, peer-reviewed, and all of that, to sit there and call you names and to completely misrepresent what you are about is certainly immoral. And I think that it's going to really badly reflect, of course, on top of all the other things that we see in the media, on our civilization, both here in the United States and in the Western world, at this point in history. And I think you're a true hero for standing up for this cause, standing up for yourself and fighting back in this court case, and just out there in the public talking about the evidence that you bring forward. In our last couple of minutes here, last 3 minutes or so, I always like to think about the future people who are listening to this broadcast. Maybe something else has happened, like 9/11. They're dealing with it themselves, and they're learning from this time in history what to do, what not to do. Can you address the future people who are listening right now about this time in history and the attacks on science? What advice would you give them? What would you like them to carry forward even long after you and I are gone?
Well, there are so many frontiers, and there are so many decent fights, and the threat of a nuclear war is hanging like a Damocles sword over our heads. Actually, if you are following politics, if you're following the economy, our civilization is really in the balance, and we are in very, very serious times now. And you may consider what is the best strategy. And I think that 9/11, because the lies, as I said previously, the fact that lies have become accepted is the true cancer. If suppose the politicians was forced to tell the truth, Suppose it was in the Constitution that the politicians are not allowed to lie. I mean, imagine. All wars would stop, poverty will end, and so 9/11, this time I would like to quote John McIlvaine. He's a very outstanding activist from New York, and his son Bobby was killed because by taking down the Twin Towers and building 7, they goofed. This time they went too far. If you have just watched Building 7 once, you realize that there is something really, really bad going on. And the mask is falling. It's the greatest mistake. They really goofed here. So 9/11 is a window of opportunity. Many people think that 9/11 has been a roadblock for freedom and all these human rights. They've been trashing all the human rights all over the world, and Snowden and surveillance and all stuff like that. And it all points back to 9/11, yes. But 9/11 is also a unique window of opportunity on a time scale of hundreds of years. It's a unique window of opportunity to turn our civilization into something which really there isn't any word for. If we fail, we know what it's going to be. It's going to be fascism and global tyranny. But if we succeed in showing the truth, and 9/11, we have no word for whatever is going to come. It's a transformation which can be easily compared with the Renaissance 500 years ago. But at that time, things went much slower. It took 150 years for the Renaissance actually to come into action, or to come through, or to whatever you say, into bearing. But now things are going much faster. The transformation we are facing now is the same magnitude, the same importance. And if we fail, it's the outlook is very gloom. So 9/11 is key, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I have 6 grandchildren.
Well, that is good enough for me. You're very inspirational to listen to. I know if you're inspiring to me, you're going to be inspiring to thousands of other people who may hear this. But good luck to you and your court case. We're going to keep our audience updated on that, and I know we're going to have you on again in the future. But Niels Harrit, thank you for coming on 9/11 Free Fall.
Thank you very much for talking to you.
This show is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.